Selling a movie to audiences is entirely built on the idea of manipulation, of doing whatever it takes to convince people to throw down money for a ticket. This often results in studios marketing their movies dishonestly, or, if we're being more charitable, misrepresenting the film for the sake of concealing spoilers. As ever, execution is key, and for every 5 movies that leave audiences off at being misled, there are 1 or 2 that actually serve up a pleasant, dramatic surprise. Whether for better or worse, the following movies all left viewers with raised eyebrows as they watched the trickery unfold before them. So with that in mind, I'm Will for Culture, and here are 10 recent movies that totally tricked audiences. Number 10. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood wasn't about the Tate murders. Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood received strong reviews from critics, though, as indicated by the film's slightly underwhelming B cinema score, some audience members felt they'd been misled by the movie's marketing. Given that the movie trailers featured extensive glimpses of Margot Robbie as Sharon Tate and lingered on shots of Charles Manson, there was a fairly reasonable expectation that the film would, at least in part, dramatize the infamous Tate murders. But of course, Tarantino's knack for revising history caused him to actually reinvent that fateful night and shift the focus away from Tate altogether. Those expecting either a grisly exploitation-style depiction of the Tate murders or a subversive finale where Tate teams up with Bruce Lee to destroy the attackers were left baffled by what they actually got. Instead, Tate is barely a character in the movie at all, having precious few lines, and in a deliberate move by Tarantino, is generally shown doing fairly mundane, ordinary things. Similarly, Manson has just a few seconds of screen time in the entire 161-minute movie. Action-wise, the finale instead sees Tate's neighbor Rick Dalton and his stuntman pal Cliff Booth take out the murderous trash while Tate is safely hanging with her pals next door. Number 9. Terminator Dark Fate was more soft reboot than sequel. Where do we even begin with the recently released Terminator Dark Fate? Presented to fans as a return to form for a series that's been on the skids for at least a decade, Dark Fate saw James Cameron returning to the series in a story and producer capacity, with Deadpool director Tim Miller taking the reins and both Arnie and Linda Hamilton co-starring. And though Dark Fate is technically a sequel to Terminator 2, the movie's marketing concealed from audiences its disturbing central conceit, that it actually rewrites franchise history in its opening 5 minutes, with a controversial twist which left many fans infuriated. The rest of the movie leaps off to become a quasi-remake of the first 2 films, starring young new cast members who can potentially carry the franchise onward, while Schwarzenegger and Hamilton are really only in it for the sake of appearances, though Hamilton is still the best thing in it. There is a single narrative trick that actually works for the better though, and that's the eventual reveal that the new Terminator target Danny isn't merely Sarah Connor 2.0, but rather John Connor 2.0, the future Resistance leader herself. Ultimately though, the deception in the trailers didn't work out, as Dark Fate immediately sank like a stone at the box office. Number 8. Avengers Endgame killed Thanos in the first 20 minutes. As you'll see throughout this list, the MCU has mastered the art of misleading audiences in a way that's actually satisfying and entertaining, rather than trying to deceive viewers because they know they've got a dud on their hands. And no MCU movie has done it better than Avengers Endgame, a film rightly shrouded in secrecy in the lead up to its release, and one which Marvel Studios expertly marketed to avoid revealing specific spoilers or even the basic context. For starters, who would have predicted that Thanos would actually die in the first 20 minutes of the movie? Given that the trailers focused on showing the second Thanos who travels through time from 2014, seeing the Mad Titan's head parted from his body by Thor early on was a genuinely shocking moment. Speaking of Thor, his entire physical transformation was cleverly obscured in the trailers, with his presence even being digitally removed from certain shots to retain the surprise. And given that just about everyone expected Captain Marvel to show up and categorically save the day by herself, it was refreshing to see her largely kept on the sidelines, save for a few cool marquee moments, allowing the OG Avengers to hog the limelight one last time. Number 7. Godzilla King of the Monsters hid its human drama in the trailers. The marketing for Godzilla King of the Monsters did a fine job presenting it as the movie so many fans wanted Gareth Edwards' 2014 Godzilla to be. 2 action-packed hours of insane fan service. It was then a little surprising when the movie hit cinemas and it became apparent that a lot of the screen time would be going through the human element, being shoved to the front, drowning out some of the monster mayhem in the process. Though King of the Monsters certainly boasts a healthy dose of CGI-fueled carnage, enjoying it requires audiences to put up with some human drama. Most dubious of all is the fairly pointless plot twist where Dr. Emma Russell is revealed to be a secret villain, complete with an unintentionally hysterical bad guy monologue. It wasn't awful by any means, and Godzilla King of the Monsters is a great film to fling on and turn off your brain for a few hours, but the human element did at times detract from the spectacle that the filmmakers knew we were all there to see. Number 6. Serenity's insane plot twist threw everyone off. On paper, Serenity seemed like a sure recipe for success. Helmed by acclaimed filmmaker Stephen Knight, while also casting Matthew McConaughey opposite Anne Hathaway, a dishy genre thriller was surely on the cards. But then Serenity actually hit cinemas, and the film was something very different altogether. This movie is destined to be remembered only for its certifiably insane plot twist, where it's revealed that the central narrative is actually a video game created by the grieving son of McConaughey's real-life equivalent, who happens to be dead. Clearly, the studio know that even hinting at the twist could sway audiences away, and while the execution of said twist is terrible, it at least makes Serenity a more interesting film than had it merely been a B-grade thriller from A-list talents. Whether you dug the twist or not, it's fair to say that everyone going into the film was fooled. Number 5. John Wick Chapter 3 Parabellum wasn't the end of the franchise. Unlike some of the aforementioned examples, John Wick Chapter 3 undeniably tricked fans in the most uproariously entertaining way. Marketed and talked up as the final entry in the John Wick franchise, the film ultimately defies this to end on yet another tantalizing cliffhanger, setting up the mother of all battles for the already announced John Wick Chapter 4. Though it seemed that the third film would end with the titular assassin either dying or finding a way to finally escape this life, it instead finds a third option, sending John on the run once again as he seeks to team up with the Bowery King for all-out war in number 4. If a fourth film can live up to the increasing insanity of each prior installment, and the series' track record suggests yes, it can, then stretching it out to 4, 5 or even 6 movies seems like no bad thing. Number 4. Captain Marvel's explanation for Nick Fury's destroyed eye. Though Captain Marvel was mostly the origin story fans expected, it did have a few surprise aces up its sleeve. First and foremost, just about everyone expected the film to reveal that Nick Fury was blinded in one eye due to some skull-related skullduggery. Dare I say, scrollduggery? Only for it to be revealed that his ocular injury was in fact caused by being scratched in the face by Goose, an alien taking the form of a cute cat. Though it left some fans genuinely mad that Fury's hyped up injury ultimately had such a hilariously benign cause, Fury's subsequent decision to play up the legend and keep the real culprit a secret deepens and humanizes his character in its own playful way. But far more surprising than that was the actual real twist, that Skrull antagonist Talos wasn't actually the villain at all. The Skrulls were simply trying to find a new place to live, while the Kree were the real villains. Number 3. Glass was a depressing anti-superhero movie. It's probably fair to call M. Night Shyamalan's Glass one of the year's most catastrophic disappointments, but at least you have to begrudgingly admire Shyamalan's commitment to a totally uncommercial and moreover unsatisfying vision. Split's tantalizing final scene hyped up Glass as an epic 3-way superhero showdown between David Dunn, the Horde, and Mr. Glass, but Shyamalan ultimately had other ideas. Hilariously, the teased final battle at a skyscraper is nothing more than a red herring, and the real final fight between Dunn and the Horde simply takes place in a bland parking lot. That subversive twist on the superhero formula wasn't the problem, but the decision to kill all 3 superpowered characters in mostly underwhelming ways sure was. Mr. Glass having his bones crushed by the Horde wasn't so bad, but the Horde being shot dead by a sniper and, worst of all, Dunn being drowned in a puddle were a step too benign. It was a classic Shyamalan twist in its own way, unexpected for sure, but hollow and incredibly underwhelming. Number 2, Spider-Man Far From Home's trio of surprise twists. Marvel Studios had one hell of a task on their plate when it came to selling Spider-Man Far From Home, given that its marketing push began before the release of Avengers Endgame, meaning that the context and setting of its story couldn't be fully explained. But the final film is jam-packed with a ton of surprises beyond being set 5 years after the events of The Blip. For starters, despite the trailers stating that Mysterio was a superhero from another dimension, that's actually not the case at all. And although the movie's producers tried to suggest that Mysterio's villainous descent would be saved for a future film, he of course reveals his true intentions midway through the movie, serving as the primary antagonist for the remainder. In the spirit of the fishbowl-headed illusionist himself, there are 2 other twists. J. Jonah Jameson makes a shock appearance in the mid-credits scene, played once again by J.K. Simmons, while the post-credits scene reveals that Nick Fury and Maria Hill were actually Skrulls in disguise all along. Given that Far From Home is a fairly inconsequential superhero sequel for the most part, these subversive flourishes helped keep audiences on their toes and ensure that the movie was a little more than just another competent, also-ran Spider-Man film. Number 1, the laundromat put Meryl Streep in brownface. Apart from duping people into believing that it'd actually be a good film, Steven Soderbergh's Panama Papers drama The Laundromat touted one very peculiar and controversial trick by having Meryl Streep secretly play a supporting character in, quote, brownface. Streep plays 2 characters in the film. Well, 3 if you count a brief fourth wall-breaking moment where she plays herself, one of them being a white woman not unlike herself, and the other a Panamanian secretary. Streep dons a fat suit, prosthetics, and has her skin mildly browned up for the part, and though the effect itself is relatively convincing, between Streep's iffy, generically exotic accent and the final moment where she removes her getup on camera, the whole thing just feels a bit, well, you know, racist. Though some might applaud the trick on the merits of its pure effectiveness, ultimately you have to wonder why Soderbergh didn't just, you know, hire an actual Panamanian actress for the part. And there you have it, folks, 10 recent movies that totally tricked audiences. Feel free to drop this video a like if you enjoyed it, and follow me on Twitter at YouSlideDogU. I'm Will for What Culture, thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you next time.